Hi, and welcome from the Asian Society Policy Institute Center for China Analysis. I'm a fellow in Chinese society here, and I'm really excited to have these very distinguished guests with me. We have Yi-Ling Liu, who is a journalist in residence at the Tarbell Center for AI Journalism. We have Biao Xiang, who is the director at the Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology in Germany. And we have Li Zhang, who is professor at the University of California, Davis. And today we're going to be talking about China's age of anxiety, youth in a time of crisis. So I'm very excited to have such a distinguished panel of guests with me today. And yeah, I think this is a very important topic. It's not maybe the newsiest of topics, but I think it is an undercurrent that is actually very important for us to think about to try to understand contemporary China today. And so, the first question I want to ask the panel, and we can go around if we can start with Li Zhang, is what do we think some of the biggest issues facing Chinese youth today are? So, Dr. Li Zhang.
Well, thank you, Barclay, for hosting this. Very exciting to have a conversation with you all here. This is such a timely topic, I do believe. And also, I just want to say that, when I wrote my book, Anxious China, published in 2020, little did I know the world was plunging into the pandemic and becoming more and more anxious, and China especially. So now it's a good time to reflect back. But for biggest problem, yeah, I would love to hear what my fellow panelists have to say. But I think for me, two things definitely. The first is employment or unemployment, as Barclay has written extensively. I think the problem today is not just finding a job. Sure, you can go out to find a job in a restaurant, delivery food, gig works, but that's not the point. I think the point is that the real struggle is finding relatively stable employment, jobs that offer some kind of dignity, fair pay, and the stability, right? That's the real hard part. So, for a lot of college graduates after 4 years, and some of them after 6 years, they have a master's degree. Many of them are left with very little more than just temporary paycheck or nothing, or a deep sense of uncertainty. And nowadays, um, opportunities for government agency jobs, state-owned enterprises, or any large firms are really becoming very scarce. And later on, we can talk about the 考公, testing for civil service, how competitive that is. So that's one. And two, obviously, it's mental health for me. Mental health is a huge problem because the pressure doesn't end just at employment. And in many families, especially with those with the legacy of one child family, most of them this generation are the single child, and they have to carry the full crushing weight of expectation of the entire family, right? So this pressure is really overwhelming. So we see depression, anxiety are rising, and these are not just statistics, right? But they are actually daily realities for these young people. So we all have seen probably some headlines. I think you guys would know probably even better if you read news every day. A lot of suicides, self-harms among school children, college students. So, I think the list can go on. I'm going to kind of stop soon to let other people jump in.
Mhm.
I just want to say one thing really quick. Like I remember a different time. I grew up in China in the 1980s and 90s. That was a time with a lot of changes, but a profound hope. And there's a song many of you probably remember called 明天会更美好. It's a really popular song. Tomorrow will be better. So I think that really captures the sense of hope for my
Mhm.
generation. But this sense of hope, I think, clearly is slipping away today. Young kids, they feel really trapped. They feel like they have no way out. So I'm deeply concerned for them. But yeah, I would like to hear what other people have to say.
Yeah, and turning that over to Biao Xiang, like you've written, some of the most interesting work around terms like involution or suspension, and sort of the way that people are trying to, particularly young people are trying to make sense of some of the uncertainty and the dynamics that Dr. Zhang was just talking about. So I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit more on, yeah, like how are people making sense of these challenges for themselves?
Yeah, I think it is an extremely important question for at least two reasons. I mean, the challenges that youth in China are facing. Number one, as Li mentioned, there's a very practical problems that they face, which have very direct consequences on their health, both physically and mentally. But at the same time, uh, the anxieties become so heavy is also because these young people themselves are asking difficult questions. They don't want to live simply as it is. So they want to reflect. They want to be different from the parents. And so therefore, the difficulties that they are facing is also an indication that this generation can be a very powerful agent for historical change. You
Mm,
could have just live on. I mean, as Lee mentioned, I mean, there's no problem. I mean, the survival is not a problem now. I mean, you can find all kinds of incomes. And actually, material condition is not that bad due to 40 years very rapid development, family savings, and etc. The infrastructure is still excellent in Chinese society. But young people have so many problems. Some people say, "Oh, you're spoiled," and etc. But I see it differently. I think, okay, this is the people wanted to ask new questions and more questions and more difficult questions about life, about how the life should be organized collectively. And this is one of the reasons that they face so many problems. So I look at it from this angle, and I very much agree with Li, especially on the last point that she mentioned, the question of hope. I think one of the biggest challenge, especially when we see it from the young people, their own perspective, is what I would call crisis of aspiration. Crisis of aspiration has at least three meanings. Number one is that there is no concrete image or narrative that give you a meaning, what tomorrow will be like. And so therefore you can live and struggle today in a fulfilling and meaningful way. Number two is that the no immediately available aspirations due to economic stagnation and etc. The worsening global condition is objectively determined. But then you can say, okay, if the current aspirations are not working, why can't you think of something else? So the second meaning of crisis aspiration is that for the young people today, if they want to have alternatives, they feel very difficult to do it practically. I mean, you have discourse like, lie flat and let rotten, and I want to become like a bird, etc. I mean, this is a social media buzz, but in reality, it's very difficult. So the social condition under which they can explore alternatives seems to be also blocked. So that need some work to reopen it. And thirdly, crisis of separation means that a separation that they have been familiar with is not becoming less and less practical, namely, just study hard, working hard, and earn money, and buy one property, two property, and three properties, and material life will become better and better, which serves as the main source of hope. That is not only become impractical, but also young people feel that it is really damaging. Even if they can do it today, they do not want to. So the familiar
mm,
separation itself become a burden. So that's the three factors come together, create a sense of crisis or aspiration. What should be my aspiration? If I can imagine something, but I cannot put in practice. And we can, analyze why is that, what is the historical and political economy reasons for such a crisis of aspiration. And in my view, I mean, the way I analyze it is also try to point a way out. Okay, in this situation, what can individual and family and school and employers can do to change, reconfigure a separation? Yeah.
mm. And Yi-Ling, how do you see some of these ideas playing out online? Because I think, you're such a good scholar of the Chinese internet. What is the online world of this kind of questioning and these new kind of desires and this anxiety? Like, how is that sort of playing out online? So you're muted.
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. I would say, first that I completely agree with what Biao and Li were saying about, especially about this like jarring kind of mismatch between, what young people, um, the lives that they want to lead, and also like the kind of external expectations that are placed on them by society, by the economy, by their families. And I think the way they kind of manage that mismatch is through these very viral online terms and memes that have become kind of pervasive in the last 3-4 years. One of which I learned through Biao, which is Neijuan, right? Involution. In some ways, it's become a kind of word of solidarity for some young Chinese who feel like, oh, well, I feel 我特别卷, like I feel really involuted. Um, like other people are feeling the same way. It's like a word that kind of coins this sense. And to give a little more context into the word for those who don't understand, it's like this sense that, hard work, putting in more work does not necessarily yield corresponding returns. This kind of conventional path of getting good grades, earning money, getting a good job, having children, getting married, buying property, no longer feels like a path towards social mobility or a path towards meaning and purpose, but kind of like a hollow shell with no end in sight. And so I think even just like coining the term and like allowing it to spread virally online has given people a sense of like, oh, I'm not alone in this kind of sense of entrapment. And then, there's so many other words that have emerged as well. Like tangping was also very much a viral online word that came into being as a result of a young man who decided that his way out of this rat race was just to do nothing at all. Um, and then you have variations of that, like Bailan was like I guess the Tangping was the predecessor of Bailan, whereas Tangping was like, okay, I'm just gonna lie flat. It's still kind of passive. Bailan is kind of like, I'm gonna um, actively embrace this kind of rotting, so to speak. Like, I'm not just gonna lie flat, I'm gonna lie flat and rot, right? I'm gonna embrace the fact that I'm like hopeless and nihilistic. And think you have terms like we are the last generation, like 我们是最后一代. That was a video, it was in reference to a video that went viral during the Shanghai lockdown. And I think that also captured a lot of that ethos and made people feel a sense of like nihilistic solidarity, right? Like, and it was in reference to when someone wanted to someone came in and was coming to take a couple away for forced quarantine when Shanghai was under lockdown, and the couple refused. And I think the policeman who was asking them to go was like, well, you're gonna bring harm and you're gonna curse the next 3 generations of your family. And they said, well, like, we are the last generation, thanks. And that I think probably also encapsulates one other pressure, one other issue that is huge in facing Chinese youth today, which is like the external pressure to have offspring and have children, both from like their parents and I think at this point from the government as well, and an increasing internal desire to not want to have children or like to want to start families or like partner up on their own terms and not on the terms of kind of the country and the previous generation.
I think that, that is a really crucial and massive question here, which is, you know, fertility. The Chinese Communist Party is obviously very worried about fertility, as are many, societies and politicians around the world. The global fertility rate is falling. It's falling very fast in China. The demographic dividend that China had is long gone. India is now the largest, most populous country in the world. And so there's all of this pressure being placed both from the government, but also within families for young Chinese to have children, but then many people don't. And I want to get your reading on this. Maybe we can start with you, Professor Zhang. But is this related to a material set of circumstances? Is it that people can't have kids because they can't afford them, they don't know how to make the finances work? Or is this more of an optimism thing? They don't feel, what you were saying, this shift into a downgrade and a feeling of anxiety. How can you bring children into a world you don't necessarily believe in anymore?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have been following a few younger folks I got to know. So I talk to them on WeChat pretty frequently. It is really shocking. I think, people in general nowadays, the younger generation don't want to have kids, let alone 2 or 3. They simply just laugh at the government encouragement. It's like, yeah, I think twofold. Like you already mentioned. I think, of course, for some people, it's a material thing, right? It's so expensive to raise a child in the city today, to send them through school and all the stuff. But it's more than that, definitely. Definitely more than material circumstance. I think it goes back to what Biao just said, I think. Uh, it's their interiority, so it's not just materiality. I think a lot of time it's the loss of a hope, and they feel like they have suffered through their life, not materially. Actually, a lot of these younger people I know, they're doing well. They come from well-to-do middle-class family, upper middle-class family. Some of them actually went overseas and come back. They don't really lack of money, but they feel like all their life they have been pushed through by their parents and grandparents and society to fulfill other people's dreams, not their own dreams. And to the point that they feel like they don't have dreams. They don't know how to dream. And I think that's very shocking. So some of them don't want to have kids. I think it's more as almost like a protest, a social protest. Their parents, of course, most of them are very upset, especially if it's a boy. Some parents I know are more open-minded, and they actually say, "Oh, I'm disappointed, but actually good, because you all know in China today the practice is if you have a child, your your parents are expected to help you take care of your kids. It goes without saying, like so basically your parents would not have life for another 3, 4, 5 years, right? Have to take care of the grandkids, otherwise it's not right. So these parents is like, oh, great, I don't have to do that. So it's very conflicted. I think it's a very contradictory feelings among them. Yeah.
And Yi-Ling, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree in terms of it being in some ways like an act of protest, like, or a kind of indictment of the time that we're living in and the state of the world. It's like it's a statement of this world sucks and I don't want to bring life into this world. I remember, I mean, like, I think you're probably familiar with the concept of run, right? And like the run generation or run philosophy of like people wanting to leave the country, particularly during COVID. And I think people referred to that concept as voting with your feet. And I like to think of like the refusal to have offspring as like voting with your genitals in some way. It's like the least that you can do to just say, I'm not happy with the state of things right now, and therefore won't bring children into the world. I definitely think that's a huge part of it, as well as like the material realities. Because, a lot of as Professor Zhang was saying, like a lot of the people who are choosing not to have kids do actually come from material means. And they like you can see that in how the pet industry is booming. Like people are pushing their cats around in baby strollers and, like buying steak for their dog. So there is definitely a sense that they want to care for and nurture something, but maybe not a human child.
I did see a post, I think, on Weibo, which was like, pets are the new kids, plants are the new pets. So, those are the kind of big investment categories in China if you're looking for where to put your money. Yeah, what do you think? How do you think these fertility issues play out?
Yeah, probably 3 points. Number one, of course, we know the fertility, as you mentioned, the fertility is dropping across the world. And in East Asia, I mean, South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, they're all, I mean, even Burma, they have super low fertility rate. And what is special about China is the speed, how rapid it is. Suddenly it dropped. And China used to be also for demographers is a puzzle, given the relatively high level of education of women, and given the increasing income levels of somehow Chinese society remained to be a near universal marriage and a near universal children rearing society until very recent, about 10 years or so. And suddenly there's a huge shift. And that is therefore the shift, the speed is a question I think we should focus. What does it mean, right? I mean, the drop in fertility itself is probably more general phenomenon. I suppose in a few years' time it will become stabilized. The second point is I think as a protest, even though the young people themselves may not say that, but I think it is a quite accurate description as Li and Yi-Ling mentioned. But I personally very much hope that there will be a further change because the confidence that a person have to bring a new life into human community, it is, I think it's vital. I mean, not necessarily individually, but for the human community, that kind of feeling is very important. I mean, so I'm quite a fan of Hannah Arendt, the philosophy of natality. It's the meaning of life does not come from the fact that you will die, like Heidegger said. The essence of being human is that we do one thing repeatedly, which is bring new life constantly to the community. And every life looks like just repeating other life, but it's always radically new. It's radically new for that individual life, for him or herself, radically new for the family, and it is radically new for the world. Even though all individuals are similar, but that specific person is always a radically new, is always a start a revolution whenever a new life arrived. I am confident that this kind of spirit still can be rekindled in Chinese society or in many other societies, but we need to work on that. So the current, I think the low fertility, so low and dropping so fast, does show that society as a whole is losing that kind of energy, the energy to sustain itself, the energy that give a vision that life is worth living for and life is worth continuing across generations. So my final point is that the declining of fertility does not mean the declining of the importance of family. So I think Professor Yan Yuanxiang, the work on new family, I don't know how to pronounce, new familism, I think is very important. So part of the reason that young people do not give birth actually paradoxically have something to do with the importance of nuclear family, because they are so closely tied to their parents. I mean, the close is not necessarily means just very cozy or very easy. I mean, the relation can be very difficult, can be toxic, but it is deeply entangled. Their life is deeply, deeply conditioned by the parental relations. And of course, financially, parents become more and more important, especially when the economy is doing badly and the younger generation rely on their parents for their livelihood. In this situation, some young people become more reluctant of have their own family. So therefore, there is a structural paradox in Chinese society today. On one hand, people become more and more reliant own the nuclear families for survival and for, survival, not like very physical survival, but maintain a middle class lifestyle and etc. for the stability. But on the other hand, it's as if they cannot afford or they choose not to reproducing the family structure. So on one hand, more reliance. On the other hand, incapability or inability of continuing. So this means in 50 years or even 30 years, we will have a situation then you have many possibly low income, middle-aged and elderly people who are never married, but yet have to look after their parents who are 80 or 90 or 100 years old. So at that time, I think the Chinese economy and society will be even have a more challenge. So therefore, we also need to think very actively and innovatively about elderly care, about long-term social welfare provision, when the family structure can no longer be a basis of social safety net.
And I think that's a really interesting point, especially because, you know, one thing that is obviously massively interplayed with the fertility rate in China specifically is the one-child policy. And so as you talk about these burdens, you know, what is quite unique to China is this huge cohort of only children, which means the burden is extra tight on this one person. And this idea of the nuclear family and the pressures, I do think there's something specific in this type of family formation that you have in China, where you have even more pressure, which has come down. And this is obviously very relevant for your current project, Dr. Zhang, which is looking at kind of the elderly. And so I was interested in this intergenerational, you know, kind of perspective of how the elderly impacts the young.
Yeah. I was going to jump in anyway to Biao's point. I think it's such a good point about the continued importance of family despite all this, you know, not wanting to have children stuff. And I want to add that from talking to these young people, I really sense that the family, well, I'm from China, family there too. I think I experience that every day. So the family is both a source of a great distress and pressure, and a source of course, protection and safety. So I think a lot of time people have this really conflicted feeling towards what we call the family, right? Because if you talk to, you know, when I did my research on anxious China, a great deal of their depression, anxiety, and the problem actually is derived from this problematic family dynamic. So the Chinese family is a very complicated structure, and it generates a lot of anxiety and a problem. At the same time, this younger generation, they have to rely on their family. A lot of time, when they graduate, they can't find a job. They go back to live with their parents. And parents accept them without any issue. While in the US, people around me here, well, a lot of young people can't find job too. They want to go back to live with their parents. But a lot of time I hear parents complaining like, oh gosh, you know, when can we send them off? Because it's a sign of not being successful and all that stuff. In China, I don't really hear that. Parents take them in without complaining about that. So I think the family is also a place to absorb unemployment and various things, but it doesn't mean these kids are happy there. So it's a very contradictory space for them. And then aging menu project, I'm looking at aging and digital technical challenges. What's interesting about the older generation is that because they have a lot of issues about using digital devices, smartphones, TVs, and hearing aids, that paradoxically sometimes brings them a little bit closer to the younger generation, because they have to rely on their children, grandchildren to teach them. The younger, the better. They told me the younger, the better. So that creates intergeneration dynamic that's very crucial actually for the survival of this older generation, senior people. So yeah, so I find a lot of paradoxes and contradictions within Chinese societies too.
Yeah, That reminds me of another piece of recent internet slang, which is the 全职儿女, like the full-time children. So no job, you move back in with your parents and you're kind of at their behest. So, you have to stick to their rules and help them out. They help you out. But this, that becomes your sort of full-time job. And then obviously that's the boss that you rebel against.
Yeah.
But yeah, staying in this kind of digital space, I kind of want to transition a bit. At the start, we talked a lot about youth unemployment. What is happening? Yi-Ling, I wanted to move to you. So, what is happening around kind of gig work, alternative forms of employment? How are the young people managing to use the internet in innovative ways to get, to try and get ahead and to try and, make the best of this situation?
Well, I'll just say that one of the biggest kind of like booming industries that I've seen emerge in the past few years, and I think partially related to unemployment, is live streaming. I just know so many stories of people, and I think this actually applies not just to young people, but a lot to young people because they're often the faces of live stream e-commerce specifically, of people who have lost their jobs or quit their jobs or want to try something new, and the thing they pivot to is live stream e-commerce. And this applies to young people, this applies to tech CEOs and founders. I think the CEO of Xindongfang New Oriental, the largest education firm, when that got shut down as a result of, like government regulation and also the intense pressure of the tutoring industry, he pivoted to live stream e-commerce. So there's this sense that this industry is a place where people can still have a little bit of agency over their own lives, and all they need to do is just get in front of a camera and sell something. The last time I came back, or this time when I came back to Beijing, I was just struck by the number of selfie cameras everywhere. I went, be it a Wang Hong, like famous internet cafe, or I mean, sorry, a restaurant or like a cafe. People would just be talking and live streaming, and like even just like tourist sites, I would see more live streamers than actually people who were there to see the thing for the sake of it. So I'd say like that is definitely the industry where I've noticed people kind of crowding as a result of not being able to find jobs in other sectors. Um, but I would say that that industry is also experiencing its own boom and bust and its own sense of nature and its own sense of evolution. Because after a while, if everyone wants to have a piece of the same pie and everyone's trying to live stream sell their like jacket or cup noodles or whatever it is they're trying to put out into the world, agencies that manage these live streamers are going to take a cut. There's only so many eyeballs who want to look at their screens. There's only so many cup noodles they can sell. And eventually, I think that has also the promises of that have definitely gone down as well. People are realizing that's not a viable path forward.
I think that's really interesting. I did a paper a few years ago with another anthropologist, and we were looking at how, people who had left the cities to go to smaller towns or to rural areas because they wanted to escape this involuted dynamic. And we were looking at this, my friend's home village, which is Li Shui in Zhejiang, and how, a lot of people had moved from Shanghai because this is a really, viable place. It was small. And by the time we were doing our research there were now 4 specialty coffee shops. There were 3, Wang Hong hair salons. There were 2 handful sellers. So suddenly all the involuted dynamics of the city had just transported themselves into this tiny town. And it does, to go back to your point earlier, Biao, I think there's something very interesting, which is, if you're in this involuted dynamic and you're just constantly spinning and not getting forward, it does seem like anywhere people go, they then just end up involuted. So whatever your escape route is, it ends up sparking a new cycle of involution, wherever that is. If it's live streaming, moving to a rural area, trying to leave China, all of these kind of avenues. And so I'm really interested in, so what does that do psychologically? Like, where do you go mentally if you feel like there actually is no escape to this kind of involuted dynamic?
Yeah, I think there's two type of involution, right? Number one is that you can say is a general market mechanism and plus certain modern organizational pattern. Because if you go to the US or any UK, and you also see there's a tendency that the bureaucracies became more and more complicated, and all the rules become convoluted, and that is a form of involution too. And this goes back to the original meaning of involution. Basically, you invest lots of energy for kind of fine tuning of small details, but without delivering anything substantive. And then you, of course, the market has this tendency. I mean, this is why market economy without a regulation can become very wasteful, because the market economy balances itself through huge waste, through this involution, and finally some people simply cannot sustain themselves and being pushed out after wasted their energy and time and resources. But then market balance back. So that's one type of involution. Then if you look at a specific sector, you say, okay, the market quickly becomes saturated. That is, we can call this more technical aspect of involution. But the Chinese people, especially young people, are so invested in the discourse of 内转 involution. Is not, it goes beyond this market saturation or just a modern organizational self-complication. It more means is like you invest in education and a certain desirable life, and then you have to compete for that, and you have to invest, especially family, and invest almost blindly. And then you are not allowed to quit. You are not allowed to say, oh, I see this market is too saturated. I'm not going to go to university and my degree. I will have my own type of life. I go for another business, another track. Not allowed. If you do so, it is a moral question. So the whole family will jump up and down, etc. That is a type of involution that the people are really worried deeply. So you can say it is a more kind of, well, the first form of involution is also institutional. I think the second one, you can say it's more total, is related to how the education system in general is organized, how honor, what is desirable, what is less desirable, the whole aspiration is organized. In China, there's one important feature in the Chinese society. 1.4 billion people basically believe in what they have only one model of what a good life is like. There's a very little diversity in terms of what is enjoyable, what is decent, what is dignified life. It's a very, very homogenized. So the aspiration is very homogenized, and the means of how you gain to succeed, to fulfill that aspiration is also very homogenized. It's basically through educational credentials. That was very different. I mean, Li will certainly remember, in 1980s, 1990s, and many people actually, the first batch of Chinese who got rich are the person who very the poorly educated, like our subjects, the people, migrant entrepreneurs in Beijing. The primary school education, they are kind of household business person, etc. They got rich, and then they gain their own social status, etc. So at that time it was more diverse, but now is you just have to go to university. Formal educational credentials is the only way you move forward. And then, I mean, Li already alluded to, right? I mean, she mentioned 考公, the craze for taking exams for civil servants, as well as now not only 考公, but also 考编, any public sector jobs, like teachers, kindergarten teachers, also become extremely desirable jobs. What does it mean? It means that, credentials, education credentials is number one, you have to get. Number two is that formal, stable jobs in public institutions. So 1.4 billion people are competing for this the same thing, and then of course it will be a huge competition. And if you fail from that, it is not just a failure or you try something else. It is a moral failure. You will not be able to get married properly. I mean, you'll feel awkward when you go to classmates reunion, and in the Chinese New Year, you don't want to go back home, and etc. It's have all the kind of consequences, and you don't want dare to talk to your parents on WeChat anymore if you repeatedly fail your Kaogong and etc. So that is that type of evolution. I mean, of course, the two are related. And but I think we should not think that the evolution that the Chinese people are talking about as if it's something universal, inevitable modern phenomenon. No, there is something specific to that, and so therefore there is something we can do about it. If we become more aware of that, probably we can, as cultural workers, like researchers and journalists like us, can provide a certain language, provide certain imaginaries that can shake that structure up a bit.
Barclay, do you want to move on, or can we follow up, or you want to move on?
No, please. Yeah, no, follow up, please.
Very, very quickly, when you asked about evolution and what do they do if they can't get out, so Biao just provided some really insightful information. And I just want to add that, when I did my book on anxious China, I noticed, psychotherapy, one way is to go to see therapists. So I encountered a lot of young people, actually parents bring them to therapy because they are so paralyzed. They cannot function well in school. But it turned out that almost 100% cases of these young folks, 内卷, 太卷了. It's not just they are 太卷了, it's their parents, right? Their parents are the root cause of a lot of these issues, this family dynamic. So when you bring the kids into therapy, a lot of time parents think, good, I spend the money, send my kid here, you fix this kid. But turns out they are a big part of that. But a lot of time they're very reluctant. They don't have time, they don't have this and that. They don't want to participate in a therapy, so it becomes extremely difficult. So psychotherapy is a form of healing and help, but it oftentimes doesn't work because the people don't have time to come back and they don't want to participate. They just want to park their kid there, and it just doesn't work. So that's I just want to add that information. It's very sad if you see how can you get out of this whole society. They just want to fix the young people, but they don't want to fix themselves. So.
Yeah, no, I really agree that came out a lot in my own anthropology research, because I obviously know you because I did work on psychotherapy in China. And yeah, people go to psychotherapists less with this kind of introspective, open view, but more with this, I have a problem, tell me what to do. It's much more in a life coaching kind of style. But I wanted to return actually, Yi-Ling, I have a question for you. So, I think Biao just gave this really nice description of you have education, you need credentials, you need to go forward. There's a very circumscribed sense of what the good life is. So there's all of this competition that leads to these very involuted dynamics. But what does AI do to all of this, right? Because this is now a global problem. None of us know what to do about education. No one knows what the value of a degree is today in the age of generative AI. And so, one thing that is going to impact all of these young people in China today is, how do you go through, how do you tool yourself for the future? How can you even think about a future when there are these transformative technologies which are, supercharging shifts in society? Like, how do people come to think about that? What have you seen in your research, in your...
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of terrifying, to be honest. I mean, that's a huge question, especially like when you take into account just like how transformative AI can be. I can think about it from a couple of levels. So from a very just like large macro scale level, if you think of AI potentially being extremely transformative and replacing a huge number of jobs in a way that like society has never seen, like the level of job replacement that we've never seen to the scale of like 10 times, say, the Industrial Revolution. I think it makes these questions of nejuan and like what's the purpose of the work that I'm doing, and like why am I doing this quote unquote bullshit job, in the words of David Graeber, you know, like what is the reason why I'm participating in this gaokao, you know, like all of that suddenly becomes a very pragmatic question. It's no longer like you're doing it and what's the purpose, it's you're doing it and it's useless. Like it literally will become useless potentially. And so I think a lot of people are actually going to be like forced to reckon with the need to radically rehaul these institutions, right? Like in the area of education, I think a lot of the gaokao we know is like perhaps no longer, some of the skills that you learn for it are no longer relevant or necessary to succeed or to get a like the actual pragmatic skills that you learn to pass a gaokao are not actually translatable into real world, you know, applications. And I think now it's like, well, what is the point of reading and writing in some ways? You know, like when an LLM can do it quicker than you, what is the point of doing XYZ if a robot can do it instead of you, right? And so I think just like the purpose of work and the nature of work will completely change. I think that's like a large scale transformation and something that's going to take place in the back of people's minds, just in terms of like what's taking place already at the level of like algorithmic systems being built into workplaces, being built into education. I think it'll be more Juan, if that makes sense. Because now you're displacing these decisions of productivity, efficiency, like clear goals, working towards those clear goals to a machine that can do it infinitely better than any human manager. And so like you see that at the level of gig labor, right? Like that viral article that came out in Renwu about delivery workers trapped in the system, right? Trapped in the system, and they are forced to work kind of excruciatingly quick and sometimes brutal hours as a result of the algorithmic system making things go faster and faster. And I think we will start to see that. We're already starting to see that move into like software engineer jobs, middle management jobs. You know, it'll eventually like reach all levels of professional life, just having algorithmic management and just making that cycle go faster and faster. And yeah, those are just like a couple of ways that I can think about AI transforming it. Obviously, like I'm a little bit gloomy about how things will take place, but you know, on the level of things like healthcare, I think this is probably relevant to Professor Zhang's work down the line. It could be transformative for elderly care and healthcare and being able to provide the support that a lot of people need that people don't have right now because hospitals are severely understaffed and hospice care is like not available to everyone. So there's also like transformative potential as well in a good way.
This actually leads on to one of the questions that we got from the audience. So Matthew Kennedy, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Warwick, he's asked, so how is the party stymieing or ameliorating the employment situation for Gen Zers and millennials? And I guess we can also talk about, you know, what is the party doing around AI and how is that going to help? Like, how is the party understanding the employment issue and what are they doing here, and what is the role of some of these new technologies, and how will they manage, you know, what could potentially, as you're saying, you know, Yi-Ling, this potential for increasing Juan? Like, I think it's also, you're stuck in that cycle because if you have a job, you're very lucky because there's going to be loads of people losing jobs left, right, and center. So the more your job can be automated, the faster it goes. But you know, at the same time, you're lucky to have that job, right? So where can the party enter and what can it be doing in this space? Dr. Zhang, if you have any.
Yeah, this is quite interesting. I'm very interested in AI and new digital technology, obviously. But it's interesting if I put things in perspective now, compare with the US. Again, I mean, I see a lot of problematic impact of AI and new technology as Yi-Ling already described here. But at the same time, I actually see a bit bright light in the development of new science and technology, especially if you compare with the US, what's going on here. When the administration nowadays here has made so many policy changes and retreat from really cutting edge biotechnology and green technology research, and it's very, very disheartening to see that, to live in the midst of this. And when I turn to China, I actually see some bright light, but whether that can be translated into jobs, that's a different question. I think the party state is fully aware of the issue nowadays, the economic downturn, unemployment rates among the youth. I, you know, but what to do to move out of this right now, it's a difficult spot because of the post-COVID effect and the convergence of very many factors, right? The ongoing trade wars that's going even worse, the economic downturn. So being aware of the problem does not mean immediately they can actually create more jobs. But I have certain hopes, actually. I think China might just as well emerge as the leader for new technology, biotech, green technology research in the world, just because the US is rolling back significantly. So maybe UK and other places, Ireland, other places will also emerge as one of the leaders. Someone described this amazing campus being built in Shanghai for new science technology research. So I do see some potential bright lights, but I think it will take some time to translate that into actually jobs and effects. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
curious what people think. Yeah.
Yeah, and just, to continue that theme, like, we've talked a lot about the anxieties and the issues of the young, but where can they be optimistic? Like, Biao, what do you see as like areas for young people to actually be optimistic about being in China, and where is there?
Oh, I think we have to, and they are young, and the world is theirs. And as I said, I can't remember, it's American psychologist said, what is anxiety? Anxiety is when the world is knock on your door to say, do please think of the world differently. And so they are doing that. I mean, there's a huge energy behind this very critical and reflexive comments in the social media. And the question is how we can organize the channels, the energy. So now, if I may go, I mean, we now talk about how the government may respond as well as AI. So can I may to return to Mr. Kadeni's question, how does the party do regarding unemployment? I mean, if you look at back the history, probably you can say that the government had historically responded to urban unemployment in 3 ways. I mean, the rural unemployment is always a problem for a long time. But urban unemployment is very visible. It's very different from the countryside agricultural unemployment or underemployment. Number one is in 1976 and 1980. And when there is a huge return migration of the once educated youth who were sent down to the countryside, came back to cities, especially big cities in Beijing, Shanghai, and create lots of social problems in the early 1980s. And that was one of the main reasons for China's economic reform, because urban youth unemployment in cities, and that started private economy. I mean, the government said we could not, I mean, the factories simply cannot absorb so many youth who suddenly returned back from Xinjiang, from all the countryside, from the northeast. So therefore, they allow them to start their own business, household business in the cities was directly driven by the need to absorb this unemployed youth in the beginning of 1980s. The second model is 1997 and 1998 the Asian financial crisis, and the response was very different from the 1980s. The response was the expansion of college education. So the number of college intakes increased dramatically from the year 1999, because this is as a way to absorb the youngsters who would have gone to the labor market directly. So use college, and then also included more and more master's degrees as a buffer zone. And that worked in a way because economy picked up again. And then we see why there's so many 大学城, Li also mentioned the campus. The campus construction is a major thing in many cities, and why that's building university dormitories and the campus become a main basis of the urban economy, and there is a larger political economy behind that. And now we see the third model. It seems that the government is trying, which is hoping that somehow technological breakthrough will re-energize the economy, and therefore create more opportunities for the youngsters. And this started, I think, from 2015 already, like the Internet Plus boom, and then the slogan of everyone can be entrepreneurs, everyone can set up businesses. And then after COVID, of course, the employment situation become even more serious. And then you have the hope that AI and the technology will completely reconstruct the economy, and also the electronic cars and etc. So will bring in somehow the new structure. So all the problem will go away. So now it comes to a question: how shall we face AI? And Yi-Ling and I will have another separate conversation about this. And I must say, I have no idea how AI will affect us. Fundamentally, I think it's a good thing, because if AI means more efficiency, then we just create more wealth. Already in this world, in this planet, we're producing much more material goods than we need for survival. The problem is always the distribution. But now if AI comes in, organize materials more efficiently, etc., good. So let's focus more on distribution. We don't need to worry about production. So on theoretical level, no problem, no issue. Let's welcome AI. And we just think more how to distribute. And think of the question of meaning. We have more time to write poetry. We have more time to make more drama and theater. There will be never enough poetry, novels, and theater in our life. Never enough. Let's do more. But now, so the peculiar thing is that so much energy was focused on AI. And in China, the debate is sometimes also get me confused. I ask, why you are the AI? People say, oh no, AI will create this online addiction. They will be desocialized. The young people will no longer, they only will fall in love online, and then there will be no job, and etc. And all these problems have been there for years. The unemployment problem, as I said, started in 2015 and becoming much worse in 2022, 2023. And AI just emerged like DeepSeek and just emerged this year also. So somehow people lump all together under the fear, the anxiety, the uncertainty have been there for quite a while. But now, as if everything is triggered by a technological change called AI. So this is a particular ideological construction of consciousness. And this is the type of question that I'm interested in. Why on earth people will think life in this way? As I said, it was just a simple question of redistribution. And now thinking, oh no, the AI will be completely all the problems will be all now attributed to a new phenomenon. So that is the causal relation won't work out. But this ideological repackaging, the manipulation by certain forces about by our public consciousness, is a question. So therefore, I think humanities and social sciences are so important. I mean, humanity and social sciences are under threat and under attack, especially in the US now. It's so important. If we will lose our own way of thinking, then if technology comes and another political event comes, as if we're all crushed by them, we cannot, as a human, we cannot think back to say, I'm going to define AI in this way because we know, thousand years civilization, how human society have been organized. And now there's new things coming up. How I'm going to define it, how I'm going to integrate that into the long tradition of human living. If we lose that capacity and wisdom, and we'll be constantly pushed around by these people who apparently have the latest technology, who apparently have so much money or have guns. I mean, they are important to have these resources. But the whole purpose of having humanity and social science is to think back. I don't know whether it makes sense, this term, to think back, to redefine it in a way that is different from the powerful figures who would like to define them. Yeah.
Okay, we're very nearly out of time, but just with this theme of optimism and where hope comes, Yi-Ling, we had a question from one of our participants, one of our guests called Amy, and she wanted to know, what will success look like for Gen Z in 10 years? How are they going to redefine success? So if you can answer that in 2 sentences, because we're 1 minute overrun.
I would say in an ideal world, having the ability to define success on their own terms.
And that's a beautiful place to end. Thank you so much. This is amazing. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to everyone who came. Thank you especially to Dr. Zhang, because she started at 5:45 a.m. So thank you very much for being so lively and active. I really appreciate it. Thank you. We're 3 time zones represented here, because me and Biao are both in Europe. But thank you very much. It's been a really great discussion and super interesting. And we will definitely be continuing these intellectual themes going forward. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And
Thank
it was
you.
great to see you all.
Wonderful
Bye.
discussion. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, see you.